participation in this session. We move now into the next session. Just allow us a few minutes to set the stage towards it. And herein in this session, we are going to be having deep insights into the offshore wind development in India, bolstering India's energy security. As was also reflected earlier by our speakers, 127 gigawatts of offshore wind energy India can generate. This is as per MNRE with our 7,600 kilometers of coastline. MNRE, along with the National Institute of Wind Energy, has recently come up with a very detailed strategy to promote the development of the offshore wind projects in the country. This strategy aims to have pipeline of 37 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 along the coastline of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, with an enabled ecosystem and infrastructure to harness the fullest potential of the offshore wind industry. In this session, we are going to be inviting the thoughts, the valuable suggestions, recommendations of our panelists on the offshore wind potential of India, why offshore, benefits of offshore wind energy generation, challenges which are there towards the offshore wind energy generation, and some of the suggestions if our panelists can also come up towards improving the offshore wind energy development in India. So let me first invite our distinguished speakers of the session. Dr. Rajesh Katyal, the Director General, NIWE, Shri Ashok Pal, Deputy General Manager, CTU, Mr. Alp Gunswer, the Senior Advisor, Indo-Danish COE for Offshore Wind and RE, Mr. Gaurav Sadhwani, the Managing Director of Skyborn Renewables India Private Limited, Mr. Suresh Pillai, the Executive Vice President, Renew, and Mr. Abhay Yagnik, the Senior Vice President and Head Business Development, JSW. The session moderator, Mr. Biswajit Roy, the Director General, GERMI, that's Gujarat Energy Research and Management Institute. As you know, this is a center of excellence in the energy sector promoted by Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation Limited, and their work bridges both the petroleum and the renewable energy sector. And Dr. Roy brings in extensive 38 years of work experience leading the oil and the gas giants of the Government of India, namely Oil India Limited, Indian Oil Corporation Limited. May I just once again request can I just request people standing in front of the stage to kindly take your seats? Our distinguished panelists are already there. We are good to start with the panel discussion. You can be seated. Thank you. With that, I request our distinguished moderator of the session, Mr. Biswajit Roy, to kindly take over from here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all the esteemed panelists who are there with me and all those who are present in this hall. In the previous session, we have heard few success stories, and if we have to realize the full potential to the tune of 100 gigawatts in India's pursuit to have 500 gigawatts non-fossil fuel, then we need to be having more and more success stories in less and less time. All the success stories that we have heard have taken their own time, but we don't have that kind of time available now. So in this panel, we have people representing operating organizations. We have head of NIWE, a research institution. We have people who are having international experience from Denmark, and we will have a whole host of issues to be discussed. Time permitting, we will also have question and answers, and we will have reflections from the audience. So we will try and cover things like what is the estimated potential of offshore wind, what are country experiences from Denmark, policy and regulatory issues, industry's expectations. CTU evacuation is a major challenge we have all been hearing in the previous sessions. Technological advancements, skilling, job creation. If this kind of capacity has to come up, a lot of job creation will take place, but we need skilled manpower. And then there are environmental challenges and ecological considerations. Hopefully, we should be able to cover all of them. And if we have time, we will again go back to the audience. So let me ask the first question to Dr. Katyal from NIWE. What are the key advantages and potential benefits of offshore wind development in India in terms of energy security and diversification of the energy mix for the country?
Well, very good morning to all of you. And all of you are aware that offshore is one of the, newer sources of renewable energy which can always contribute towards the energy transition. And just to add to the benefit of the members, that any turbine which is being deployed deep into the sea, it is called as offshore wind farmability. And the major advantage, needless to mention, all of you are aware that the free flow winds which are moving over the surface of the seascapes are always less turbulent. The reason being that there are no obstacles, no towers, no buildings, no trees when compared to the land-based turbines. And once we say that the turbulence intensity is less, the wind speeds are obviously going to be higher. And if you see the basic definition of turbulence intensity, it is nothing but the ratio of the wind speed standard deviation to that of the mean wind velocity. In mathematical terms, it is nothing but Ti is equal to sigma by mu bar. So if you see, turbulence intensity is inversely proportional to the average wind speed. So when we say that in the seascape, the wind flow speeds are less turbulent, obviously the wind speeds will be higher, and in turn the capacity utilization factors will be higher to the tune of about 15 to 20% when compared to the land-based turbines. And that is one of the major advantages which offshore wind has. The second one, of course, these open seascapes are available. There are no space constraints. There is no issues with regard to the area availability when compared to the land-based turbines, and particularly when the offshore turbines of 14 megawatt plus with the higher rotor dias of 262 to 264 meters. If you find a space in the land-based turbines, and India particularly in class 3 wind regimes where the winds on an average are 6 to 7, when you bring these 15, 16 megawatt turbines for Indian onshore market, they may not give that much of outputs which are available, which can be available in the offshore scenario. So in that case, I think offshore 15, 16 megawatt is the best option for offshore as there is no space constraint. And the second is, in land-based turbines, there are a lot many issues with regard to the disputes actually. I think so. The logistic management, the land acquisition is becoming one of the challenges nowadays, particularly for the land-based turbines. And in the seascapes, these issues can be well taken care. Only you have to just get a lease deed signed and get going for your 20 to 25 years of expected design life, thereby mitigating the risk of underperformance. And the third area, the areas which we have picked up in Tamil Nadu or Gujarat coast, they are all very nearer to the cities and the load centers, and that would mean that the transmission losses will be very, very less when compared to the, very, very less when compared to the, land-based turbines. So that is one of the reasons that whether you use HV-AC cable or HV-DC cable, the losses will be very less. And final reason which I feel is the offshore turbines are less noisy when compared to the land-based turbines, because the acoustic noise, the emissions which are coming from various components and subsystems in the onshore turbines are very, very high, and in the offshore that will be one of the major advantages. So having said that, in the energy transition, we all are aware that at the present moment, the judicious power mix in the country is about 417 gigawatt, and out of which the thermal has taken a lead role by injecting 217 gigawatt, which would mean coal, oil and gas is injecting 57 to 58% penetrations into the Indian grid, even though the renewable has come to the numbers of 175 gigawatt, and it has taken a paradigm shift from 20 percentage to 41%, including large hydro. So in that context, the offshore will definitely contribute in the diversifying in the energy transition, which will definitely ease, or I should say it will good for energy transition for reducing the carbon dioxide emissions as per the Honorable Prime Minister's vision to bring renewable energy 500 gigawatt by 2030. So offshore will definitely contribute in the energy transition, which we have a long numbers and pipelines on the way.
So as we heard, offshore has a major role to play. We are just about beginning with offshore in our country, but then it has got a long journey ahead, and it will be contributing in a significant manner, as we have heard just now from Dr. Katyal. Let me move on. If we have this kind of production that takes place from offshore wind, the associated challenges in terms of evacuation. And we have somebody from CTU. We have Mr. Pal. Mr. Pal, the question to you is, if we have this kind of power that gets generated over next few years, couple of years' time, how prepared are you, or what are your plans to evacuate the power from the offshore wind projects? If you can elaborate a little more.
Okay, thank you. The transmission planning has already been done for 500 gigawatt integration of non-renewable power plants, and that includes 10 gigawatt of offshore. Actually, we have planned, depending on the visibility of the offshore generation projects projected by MNRE, and right now the initial stage 5 gigawatt of Gujarat and 5 gigawatt of Tamil Nadu has been planned. So accordingly, the transmission system has already been planned for that, and has been included in the 500 gigawatt report, and which is available in the websites, which basically includes the transmission system. The major part is that it has to be some undersea component, submarine component. So that's the unique part which makes it different from the onshore projects. So we have to have a offshore pooling station where the projects will be pooled, and from there offshore to onshore pooling station there will be cables. Depending on the distances, it will be either AC cable or HVDC cable. Fortunately, in our cases, the distances are within 40-45 kilometers, so we can manage it with AC cable, which makes our system slightly less expensive compared to HVDC option. And after this cable, then there is an onshore substation where, in the Tamil Nadu case, we pool the entire 5 gigawatt in the same substation, and from there, through high capacity 400 kV double circuit lines, we integrate with the present grid. In the Gujarat, we take it to two different coasts, and for 1.25 one coast and the remaining power to the other coast. And there are two different onshore pooling stations that come, and from there 400 kV high capacity line we integrate it to the main grid. So that is what we are now, and depending on the more projection, more visibility of the projects, we will plan accordingly.
Fine. So maybe in the next round we might have a few more questions to ask all the other panelists. Let me go through with the first round itself. Mr. Gunsavar, the panelist next to Mr. Pal, he is Senior Advisor, Indo-Danish Center of Excellence for Offshore Wind and RE. I would like to ask you a question. We all know Denmark has done commendable work in the area of offshore wind. So what I would like to know from you, and for the benefit of all the audience present here, what are the necessary policy and regulatory frameworks that are required, with your experience of Denmark and otherwise, to promote offshore wind development in India, and what lessons can be learned from other countries with successful wind industries? Your views, please.
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. And thank you for the question. I would like to start by, first of all, explaining what has been successful in Denmark. And in Denmark, the policy framework for offshore wind has been intended to to reduce the risk, so that it will the projects, the price of electricity will be as low as possible. So for that purpose, there are some policy instruments that have been used. To start with one of them, we can talk about maybe one of the most important is the concept of one-stop shop. That is what Danish Energy Agency has become to reduce the risk for the developers who need to contact different stakeholders, different authorities, governmental authorities, and also other stakeholders in the region to be able to have a smooth tendering process. So one-stop shop concept is actually Danish Energy Agency that has the role of communicating with the developers, with other stakeholders, with other ministries, and to reduce the risk and also to issue the permits, plus prepare the tender documents, so runs the whole tender process. That was the one-stop shop that Denmark has implemented, I can say, successfully. Another was marine special planning. That is, again, another risk reduction instrument that is used to avoid, first of all, to clarify the offshore wind zones to seabed, and to avoid any conflict between different stakeholders on the seabed. So that also helped clarify which part of the seabed is going to be used for offshore wind, so that it will be clear of any obstacles, any kind of issues that might come up later on. Another one that has been applied and we can say is changing is the grid responsibility of the developers. Initially, of course, it's a process, it's a progress. It started with Energinet, the Danish TSO, taking care of the offshore substation for the Danish offshore wind farm projects, as well as the export cable and onshore substation and so on. But as the development went on, and as the developers became more experienced, first of all, they took care of the offshore substation in the wind farm, their own substation. Then, in the last Thor tender, they also take care of the export cable. And right now, in the next Danish tenders, the plan is to also give the responsibility to the developer to take care of the onshore export cable, the grid connection point. Another policy instrument that we can talk is, and maybe a little bit underestimated one, is the stakeholder dialogue and also the market dialogues. So then the Danish Energy Agency runs for every tender, offshore wind tender, a market dialogue and a technical dialogue. Because the model that is being used in Denmark is, it's one site at a time. So each tender is opened for a single offshore wind farm project, and the whole area is cleared from any obstacle or any kind of risk, as I'm trying to explain. So in that sense, the dialogue is very important. First of all, technical dialogue, because site investigations are taken care by Danish Energy Agency and is given as a mandate to Energinet, the Danish TSO. Everything, all the data and all the work that is going to be carried out as part of the site investigation has to be agreed with all the potential stakeholders. So that is the main technical dialogue. And then there is the market dialogue, where different requests, inputs are taken by Danish Energy Agency from the developers. So we can say these are also like risk reduction mechanisms. Of course, there are supporting mechanisms such as given as mandates, for example, every developer that is going to be developing the wind farm, the tender, need to contact and handle any kind of future issues with the local fisheries, especially fishing communities. That was the development in Denmark as well that helped clarify and putting maybe this risk on the developer side. Of course, a very big part of the framework is the environmental impact assessment. These studies, I'm talking mostly about any kind of mammals, like plants, any kind of fauna, and also as well as birds. So these kind of studies take really long time. And Danish Energy Agency previously has been taking care of this responsibility for each site. But as things change again with the last tender, Thor tender, there is a new framework that has been used that's called strategic impact assessment, and that is where a bigger area in the shore has been assessed environmentally and to be reduced from environmental risk, and this helped the developers to allocate the risk on the Danish Energy Agency's work, or to take the risk on themselves if they don't find it sufficient. So these are the frameworks that some of which we can apply for different models in India that have been mentioned in the strategy paper as well. So this some of them we have already been working on. Some of them, such as marine special planning, for example, something that we have really spent time on, and it is an ongoing process, and we are still developing. And we are still discussing the other frameworks. For example, one of the most important, as I mentioned, was the one-stop shop. And there's a single window clearance that is expected to be taken care by NIWE for the upcoming tenders. And yeah, it's an ongoing process, but we are working on it for Indian scope as well.
So we have just now heard some of the experiences that Denmark has gone through, and they're all suggestive in nature. By no means they will be prescriptive, because our conditions here in India could be vastly different from what the conditions in Denmark have been. But nevertheless, they do give us a few pointers as to what are the things that we need to be looking into. So we have some ideas now, and we are thankful that he's present here and he's been assisting MNRE in the Center of Excellence, and we get to know all the developments that have taken place in the rest of the world elsewhere. We will come back to you again, time permitting. Mr. Sadhwani, we have all the three people from operating companies on the other side. What I would like you to advise or tell us to this house is what is the current state of affairs in the offshore wind industry globally, and how does it help us in India to take cues from them and mature rather quickly, because the targets are very high for us. What are your views, your reflections on that?
Thank you, Dr. Roy, for this question. So, just for the introduction, Skyborn, formerly WPD, is a Hamburg-quartered group. So we are a developer and a IPP on particularly offshore wind. So we started our journey in offshore wind way back in 2000, and that's when we started developing the first offshore wind project in Germany. So that was 48 megawatt in the Baltics. Since then we developed two large projects in Germany, and now we are building 1 gigawatt in France and another 640 megawatt in Taiwan. As we all know, offshore wind is primarily being pushed in Europe. And there is immense experience in the markets such as Germany, France, Denmark that Alp just described, and also the UK, which spearheaded this development. As we see, all these markets started with the feed-in tariff in order to support the early developments in the offshore wind, because similar to what we are seeing in India, offshore wind is costly in the initial phase because of the higher risk and also the higher capex associated with this technology. And therefore, in order to support the early investments, a majority of the European governments supported this in terms of feed-in tariff and also in the provision of the grid. And over the years, as the technology matured, the supply chain developed. Now almost everywhere the capacities are awarded based on auctions or tenders, programs, as we call it. Now, one thing that we see currently is that, if I speak in particular about Germany and France, there is a very clear timeline and policy certainty with respect to the tenders. Let's say, for example, Germany has set 7 gigawatt of annual auctions that will happen now. The first round already happened earlier this month, where 7 gigawatt of capacities were submitted by the developers, and then this will be repeated every year. Same goes for France, where there are pre-qualified bidders, and there is a very well-defined program of capacity and the timeline of the auctions being described upfront for next 2 to 3 years. And what this helps overall is that it gives a very clear timeline to the developers to manage the supply chain, so that they can order and manage their supply chain and ordering over the years, and ultimately all of that risk which could get reflected in the final tariff gets resolved. And that's why now we see very low tariffs in these two markets in particular. And if I talk about the French auctions, some of the very two unique aspects that the tender offers is the interest rate protection. If from the close of the auction until the financial closure, whatever change in the interest rate that happens, the CFD tariff gets adjusted accordingly. So developers get that benefit of the interest rate risk over time, and that's why you see again gets reflected in the lower tariff. Same also goes for the commodity risk. They have identified key commodities such as steel, copper, and they provide some commodity indexation benefit to be passed on, and again that gets reflected. And lastly, into the Taiwan, because in the Asia Pacific, that's the one offshore wind market that has done exceptionally well. Again, they started their first auction way back in 2017-18, came up with a very lucrative feed-in tariffs for the developers. It was somewhere in the range of 14 to 15 rupees for the first 10 years, and then it gets reduced by 40% for the 11th year to the 20th year. And the same is also in the most recent auction where we also were awarded 600 megawatt capacity. So so all of these are good lessons that how the initial push in terms of policy framework, certainty, timelines, and feed-in tariffs enabled the investments to come, and then these countries are already seeing very low tariffs in their market, and now Taiwan has removed any feed-in tariff. Now it is entirely on the developers to have corporate PPAs and other markets and so on. So that's how the global industry is evolving, and we have seen one example of Taiwan. In a matter of 4 to 5 years, they are having exceptionally competitive tariffs in their market. And I think all these are good lessons for us in India to adopt in our policy frameworks. I mean, I'll not say we can simply copy paste, but of course fine tune them in the context of Indian conditions. As we have viability gap funding framework which is defined, it also it's a kind of one-time subsidy which lowers the risk of depending on the subsidy for 20 years, and it gets compensated within the first few years. So it's overall beneficial for the industry. And I think, last thing which I'll briefly mention is the supply chain, global supply chain of offshore industry. Given the war in the Ukraine and Russia, so we understand supply chain disruption that has happened, and I think the Indian government already understands that risk, and a lot of Atmanirbhar programs have already been initiated, and this is basically the importance of having supply chain control, which we are currently seeing. That's more particularly offshore wind industry, in terms of OEMs or the supply chain, and also vessels, also the installation vessels, which are completely tied up, and that has led to the cost getting pushed upwards, and that has an impact on the profitability. But the developers or the investors are not giving up any of their sites. They are just waiting because it's a short-term phenomena. We are hopeful that it will go back to the learning cycles that we were used to seeing pre-COVID, and hopefully the same will also get benefited. So again, it's an opportunity and a lesson for India to also start investing into the supply chain development by having a clear time frame of these auctions, so that the OEMs can invest in this as well. Thank you.
So what we clearly learned from him is that having specific timelines are important, like Germany has done, France has done, and Taiwan has also done. We have had the experiences of Denmark, we've had the experiences of a couple of other countries. We might be starting a little late in the offshore wind area, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to say. We can learn from those experiences that are already available with us, and the policy guidelines can be framed accordingly. Is that what you are very politely trying to convey? Thank you so much. Mr. Pillai, Executive VP Wind, RE New Power. What I would like to ask you is, how does offshore, we all know that India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind US and China. Though our per capita emissions are very low, but in terms of total emissions, we are third largest. So how does this offshore wind development align with India's renewable energy goals and targets, and what role can it play in reducing carbon emissions?
Sure, thank you. Basically, if there are clear studies which basically say that out of the various energy sources, wind energy has the lowest carbon footprint. And given that most of our present energy is still depending more on coal-based power generation, so we have a big scope where we can utilize the wind resource that is available in the country for seeing that there is avoided carbon emissions that we make as a country. Just to look at the year that has gone by in 22-23 itself, by the electricity generation from wind energy, we would have kind of on a ballpark level avoided something like 60 million ton of carbon emissions. And if we look at the capacity addition that is being planned for wind in India, including onshore as well as offshore, there is a huge contribution which wind can make in our journey towards net zero, and also most importantly also looking from an energy security perspective as well. So wind does have a very significant role and contribution that can be made for the country in that.
So out of the total emissions that take place in India, the rough numbers are somewhere around 2.7 gigatons. You're saying
Yes.
that offshore wind alone has the capacity to take care of about 60 million
Going by the
tons.
potential. Yes.
Going by the potential that we have. Potential itself is something where we have differing estimates, and we will come to Dr. Katyal in the next round, and we will try and understand actually what the potential is, because all the developers would like to know what the potential is actually.
Yes.
Let me now come to Mr. Yagnik, Senior VP and Head BDJSW Energy. We have spoken about the policy side, we have spoken about the production side, we have spoken about the country experiences. But if we have to do this in India, we require a lot of skilled manpower, something that without which the industry will not move forward at the speed at which we want it to move. Then the question that I would like to ask you for the benefit of the House is, how can the offshore wind development in India contribute to job creation? If you have any specific numbers in mind that you can share with the House, that will be good for us. Skill development and local economic growth in the coastal communities. Denmark had this problem of talking to the fisheries community. So what are some of those challenges that we are likely to face, and what your fix on numbers is?
So thank you very much. Thanks to MNRE for giving us this platform. I represent JSW. We are not only the IPPs, we are also the consumer of the renewable power, because the JSW Steel is now doing a energy transition. We are presently developing almost 2200 megawatt of wind power, and we are keenly watching this space for the offshore to enter for our own captive consumption, green hydrogen generation, as well as an IPP. So coming to your questions on the job opportunities with the offshore, I think this is a huge opportunity. In offshore, there would be a lot of job would be created. How much we would be capitalized depending upon how fast we would be able to develop this 30 gigawatt of offshore wind power plant targets. And the estimate says that almost more than 150,000 jobs would be created. The major areas in which the jobs would be created would be, first is the pre-construction stage, where would be mainly the engineering activities or the feasibility studies have to be carried out, wind resource assessment have to be carried out. Then the second area would be the manufacturing and the supply chain. I think initially I am doubtful whether enough jobs would be created in that area, because mostly we would be dependent on the import of the equipments unless until we show the OEMs the pipeline in terms of WTG capacity. But that would be also another area, let's say whatever the localization we are able to do in initial years of a development. Third would be the construction stage. During the construction, the marine construction, which would be very critical, and there the substantial amount of jobs would be created. Fourth would be the port and marine logistics. So again, the port infrastructure, I think we are equipped or we would be at least having a capability to develop that. But marine logistic in terms of a requirement of various vessels, which are the specialized in terms of constructing the offshore wind turbines, that would be, initially it would be difficult, and again we would be depending upon either the European or the Chinese suppliers for that. And the fourth would be the O&M, yes, with the experience in terms of the onshore capabilities in O&M, we would be able to replicate that in offshore wind O&M also. So frankly speaking, whether we have that skill sets, whatever the jobs would be created, whether those skill sets are available within the India to fill those gaps, the answer is no presently. But there are few silver linings are there in the clouds. One would be we have a very robust onshore wind industry. So I'm sure there would be a certain manpower which would be upskilled or which would be reskilled to the extent, and at least 20 to 30% of the manpower can be utilized for the offshore wind industry. And the second would be the offshore oil and gas field. So there the substantial amount of experience is available in terms of development of a marine infrastructure. So those would be can be utilized for our offshore applications. Third one would be port infrastructure. Again, there we can utilize shipping industry, which we can utilize certain manpower for our offshore experience. But in order to create a sustainable supply of manpower, I would suggest that I think the three main stakeholders in this area, government, education and institutes, and the industries should come together, and there should be at least a post-graduation program for 2 years, where specifically meant for the offshore, because there are so many specialization of studies or the course which are being provided by the different institutes, but I don't think that would be specifically meant for the offshore, to cater the offshore industries. I think the IIT Madras would be having the highest credential in terms of the marine infrastructure. The institute like that should take the initiative with the government collaboration. If required, we can approach the Nordic countries to get certain benefits of a knowledge, and we can create that courses so that this particular skill sets would be sustainable for the future. Maybe the initial 1 gigawatt or 2 gigawatt, we can get the manpower from the different industries which are like-minded, but not for the future growth of 30 gigawatt of offshore wind projects.
Well, I would have liked to go through the second round with all the panelists who are present here, but owing to the paucity of time, as I've been told by the organizers, I'll restrict myself to only 2 questions, to 2 of them. And after that, we'll throw it open to the House. 1 question to the left of, and 1 question from the right side, and after that, we will call the session closed. So, Mr. Gunsever, the next question that I would like to ask you is, what are the key technological advancements, because Denmark has done a lot of work ahead of us, and innovations in offshore wind that can be leveraged in India, and how can collaboration with international partners support us in India for this process? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you again for the question. I can maybe give an example from the most updated technological development, which are the energy islands that are being developed right now in Denmark. But the beginning of that concept, it's still a concept. Before it originated from an offshore wind farm, actually. So between Denmark and India, there are 2 German offshore wind farms, Baltic 1 and Baltic 2. And then there was a Danish offshore wind tender called Kriegers Flak. So the location of the project was very close to the German wind farms. So there was an idea of connecting these wind farms. So what happened was that there was an extra transformer added to the offshore substation of the Kriegers Flak wind farm, which would be then connected. Actually, the original idea was to have a direct HVDC connection, but later on, it was it became too expensive. So there's an AC connection between the Kriegers Flak wind farm and the Baltic 2 wind farm. So the German grid is, the connection to the German grid, the export cable was 150 kV, and the connection, the planned export cable to Danish grid was 220 kV. So with an extra transformer on the Danish wind farm, it became possible to actually transport the generated electricity to either Germany or Denmark. So the Kriegers Flak wind farm acted, and even during low production times, it was possible to also use it as an interconnector between Germany and Denmark. Of course, there was some kind of asynchronous, like a phase difference, but it was handled by another back-to-back converter in Germany. They called it combined grid solution. So this allowed electricity transportation between Germany and Denmark. And the wind farm acted as an interconnector, which helps also balancing on the network. So this concept was tried and completed and commissioned by the end of 2020. And the new concept now is going to be the energy islands. So Denmark is working on 2 energy islands right now. One of them is an artificial one, and one of them is planned in Bornholm. But the artificial one is planned to be 10 gigawatts for now. And it's going to be connecting, again, Germany, Denmark, and Holland. And of course, there are other ongoing projects, I think between, as far as I know, Belgium and UK, and they are also working on the energy island concepts. And Denmark's plans have been postponed from 2030 to 2033 right now. And this kind of concept could help, could be used in India in the future in terms of balancing transportation of electricity. Of course, in Europe, there are electricity markets, so different pricing. So it also helps balancing out the price differences and stability and security of supply. So this concept, I think, could be investigated if it is possible to be implemented in India. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Katyal, there are differing estimates in terms of the potential that is there for the offshore wind. NIWE has come out with certain estimation. World Bank has come up with certain estimation. What are your views on this? World Bank says there could be a potential to the tune of about 400 gigawatts. NIWE has come out right now with about 70, 80 gigawatts. So where is the actual, some reasonably confident kind of a number that the developers can bank upon and they can actually plan their investments? What are your views on this?
Sir, I think this is an estimated potential, and this needs to be validated by fresh long-term measurements. And what NIWE has done is it has covered the Gulf of Mannar in Tamil Nadu and only the Gulf of Kambat in Gujarat coast. And there we say that there is 35 to 38 in Tamil Nadu and 35 to whatever 32 in Gujarat. But when the World Bank, they have also included Gulf of Kutch in Gujarat, which in our opinion is basically a seismic prone zone. And I'm not saying that we cannot build, we can build the offshore projects in the entire 7,600 kilometers. But the question is, what will be the levelized cost of energy generation? So if you add this seismic zones and add to the foundation cost, you will have to make the seismic prone or earthquake prone designs on the foundation, which will add many folds to the cost, and that will increase the levelized cost of energy generation for its 25 years of design life. And this will not mitigate the risk of underperformance, and also the return on investments will be very, very high. And the second thing what World Bank has done is they have also taken the Andhra coast, which in my opinion, the wind speeds as per the mesoscale data available are between 6 to 7 meters, which is already available on land. Most of the lands in India are in the class 3 regimes with 6 to 6.5 or 7 meters on an average. And if you are going to build in the coast with 6 to 7 and putting the cost of 20 crores per megawatt or even higher, when you can build a project of 6 to 8 crores in onshore, so that makes sense that the PLFs will not be very high in Andhra coast. So that way you can always say that there are a lot of potential, but then finally we have to look into the total levelized cost, the capex cost, the development cost, and then finally what would be the return on investment for that project. And secondly, what World Bank has done, that they have gone 50 meters and down the water tables, and then they say that on floating buoys we can put many 100 plus gigawatts or whatever, whereas we are concentrating on the coastlines till 200 nautical miles, which is exclusive economic zones. So if you go deeper and go wider, maybe 50 meters or 100 meters away from the coast, you can always put turbines, but the key question is whether that is cost economically viable or not. So they have taken that numbers into consideration. That way we have a long coastline. Gujarat has also the longest coastline of 1600 kilometers. The Tamil Nadu has 1076. The other coasts also have a potential, but then we will have to look into the cost considerations. And this, we are not saying that we will end up in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. This is the phased activities. Once we do with this, we may have to explore more possibility with real-time measurements and then try to take much more informed and better decisions with regard to the estimates. Thank you.
So in order to be able to finish on time, I would now throw open the session to any questions from the audience. One I can see right in the front. Somebody can hand him over a mic, please. And one we can take from the side where I'm pointing out to. Please go ahead with your question.
So, thank you, sir. This is Rakesh Rathore from JSW. My limited question is basically now, because we are all going into the RTC and to meet our green hydrogen demands also, wind is requires thrice of the solar to make that mix and the average of that energy. So we may need to flip our target of solar and wind for our 500 gigawatt target maybe. Therefore, this offshore wind is really important to that way. My question is to Mr. Ashok Palji, that we are also try to build a connection between Sri Lanka and India, and taking cue from Mr. Alp that there is a wind offshore plant which is acting as a Lilo point between the two countries. Can we frame out something similar here also? And that also will help to these offshore wind developer to have at least an offshore substation where he can pool his substation and while reducing the cost.
Yeah, this interconnection between India and Sri Lanka is basically to exchange the power between the two countries. It's not for balancing the power or any other needs. It is more of the importance to Sri Lanka than of India, because Sri Lanka being an island, they may become surplus or they may become deficit, so they need support, and they can avail the renewable energy sources from India through this interconnection instead of having the thermal sources installed in Sri Lanka itself. However, so we can have interconnection, and the discussion is going on for since years to have an HVDC interconnection between India and Sri Lanka. But having said that, if we have offshore potential near Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka can integrate that to their grid, and if they become surplus at some time, so this interconnection will definitely help us sending their surplus power to India. Similarly, when they are deficit of power, they can take all the renewable power from India, which will be part of that could be the renewable offshore energy sources.
So maybe one question from this side, if there is anybody who would like to ask a question to any of the panelists. Go ahead. This is the last one that we will have in order to be able to make it on time.
Thank you, sir. My question is for Mr. Gaurav Sadhwani. For the next immediate 1 year, what policy and regulations you foresee that will help in development of offshore wind in India? Just a simple things.
Sure. Thanks. In fact, this is something, very important in the sense that, sitting out of India office for a global platform, we are always competing with the other neighboring markets for the funds to be allocated to the Indian market. And the very first question, is the policy and the regulatory framework, for the investments in India, and what can be done about it. With respect to the policy frameworks, one most important aspect, as I mentioned also earlier, is the visibility of the auction timeline and the certainty around it. What we have already seen is the MNRE coming up with the strategy paper and outlining the vision. I think what is important is that our offshore wind policy is updated, and that strategy paper vision is incorporated, that the targets are firmly set, and the implementing agency should go by the timeline that has been described in the next 7 years in order to award 37 gigawatts of capacity. So that's the first thing that we as a global investor would want to see. And then, with respect to the maritime spatial planning, I think there has been exceptional work done by MNRE, NIWE, and Center of Excellence coming up with a detailed assessment of both Tamil Nadu and Gujarat offshore regions. But we have to now start working on that. Identify what are the issues that have been highlighted in that maritime spatial report, so that all the environmental and social considerations that have been highlighted, they are passed on to the relevant ministries, and there is a very clear permitting and approval process defined for the next immediate step, which is the surveys. This is important in the sense that globally, in UK we have 100 gigawatt of pipeline. In China there is 150 gigawatt of pipeline. So in India, there is no surveys happening as on date. So we have to change that. And I think pipeline is something which is reflective of the confidence in the policy and regulatory framework, that the investors are willing to contribute capital and resources, so that they are undertaking these surveys, which are costlier as compared to onshore wind and solar. So here the investments runs into millions of dollars. So that's why it is important to protect that. Maybe one more thing which I'll say is the general infrastructure. By infrastructure is the grid and the port infrastructure. I think during the last stakeholder consultation, the requirement of export cable and onshore grid connectivity has been highlighted, and I'm sure ministry is working on it. The same also goes that if there is a very clear commitment on developing the port infrastructure in both the states, and that gives the confidence to the developers that yes, by the time the offshore construction will happen, this infrastructure is already in place, and we will not get disturbed by the port infrastructure. And I think last would be in terms of customs duty waiver, because all these, especially the first few tenders, because of there is no supply chain in India and no offshore wind turbines are being built, a customs duty waiver, GST waiver are some provisions which can be provided. It's a kind of indirect subsidy where a government is letting go some of the revenue, which ultimately helps drive more investments. And I think I must also thank the ministry for being very proactive in coming up with the ISTS waiver that was announced just a few weeks back, and also some open access charges were waived off. Though we would want to see cross subsidy surcharge also waived off, but that's something I'm sure it is being deliberated at the ministry. So thank you.
So thank you so much to all the panelists. One round of applause for all the panelists who are present here. We would have carried on for a little longer, but for the paucity of time, we have some information available here now, right now from this panel. There are certain dots which are connected. There are certain dots which yet need to be connected. I'm sure it's an evolving space, and once all the dots get connected, we will have a robust offshore wind policy which will come up in the place, and that will help all of us who are present here and in the country in the longer run. Thank you so much.
So thank you to all our panelists for your very valuable insights, and would like to request Dr. Katyal to kindly present the mementos to our speakers. All, sir. Everybody. And many thanks to our moderator, sir, also. Okay. We'll close with a group photograph of everyone. Thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, we now break for lunch. It's going to be, we're starting the next session at 2:20. So request you to enjoy your lunch and then post that good discussions. The next session on strengthening the wind energy manufacturing ecosystem in the country. Thank you. Lunch, ladies and gentlemen.